Welcome to episode 106 of Anchored in Education. I'm E. Scott England, and Anchored in Education is the podcast dedicated to all things education. Educators across the world routinely engage in conversations surrounding fundamentals, concepts, and new ideas that improve this great profession. Sometimes we agree, other times we disagree. But at the end of the day, we are all anchored in education. Last week, Tracy Badua joined us to talk about her book, This Is Not a Personal Statement. That conversation highlighted the pressures that students often feel in life, especially academic, and the extremes they will sometimes go to. It was a relevant conversation for us to remember, not just in support of students, but for us as adults as well. When we finished the conversation, Tracy mentioned that she had another book coming out on May 9th. Yeah, like May 9th, tomorrow. It's called The Takeout. And she sent me a preview copy, and while I was reading it, I realized just how often what she was writing about happens in real life. Now, I'm in the world of academia, so I live in a world of citing sources. But what happens when someone steals your idea for their gain without ever giving you credit? This is just one of so many different themes Tracy covers in The Takeout. I knew she had to come back to talk about this as well. Tracy, welcome back to Anchored in Education this week.
So happy to be here again.
Yeah, well, we're happy to have you because last week on Anchored in Education, we discussed your book, This Is Not a Personal Statement, and the real-life implications this fictional story has. And it's amazing to me, just feedback I've had from listeners and like how much they identify with Perla and everything going on in that story. You know, maybe not identical as far as like, you know, forging an acceptance letter and all that. But I mean, people identify with that. And so now we're back this week with a book that's going to be released. How exciting is this? Tomorrow. And so, I mean, I know as an author, you've got to just be, you know, like, here it is, all the buildup and everything else. And it's called The Takeout. And while it's another work of fiction, again, you've tied reality into it. And all of the different implications and the ties are huge. So let's begin today's conversation learning more about The Takeout.
Great. Yeah. The Takeout is aimed at a different age range, and this is not a personal statement. This one is a middle grade novel, so ages 8 to 12, or as I like to tell everyone in my family, it's 8 and up. So it's,
yeah, I was going to say, I loved it. So
thank you. So The Takeout is about a girl, Mila, who has a Filipino-Indian fusion food truck that her family runs in this cute little beach town that she just moved to. Then a pair of celebrity chefs move into town with suspiciously similar recipes. And she has to decide, you know, whether she wants to expose them as recipe thieves and if she's willing to tank her entire social life because everyone loves these celebrities, of course. Of course. There's a little bit of Filipino folk magic and, of course, some exploration of cultural identity and what it means to belong. But hopefully readers find it just, you know, fun and foodie and magical.
Oh, I mean, there's no way they couldn't find it, all those things. You know, you talk about had a little bit of Filipino folk magic into it. So as you're writing this, how much of just your growing up and the different stories, because I mean, I know like last week we talked about, I believe it was your grandfather had a big influence on you to the written word. And so I'm sure there was a lot of stories shared. So how did that come out in the writing of this?
So for this one I lean heavily on Filipino folk magic, and there's a branch of it, like albularyo's are essentially folk healers. Or they do potions, or they do some sort of tinctures. And that's kind of what Mila tries to recreate in the book. And I remember we went on a family trip to the Philippines just like decades ago. And my brother and I went swimming in the local river in my dad's town. And my brother came down with a pretty awful like stomach bug.
Okay.
And they called like a local healer to come and kind of, you know, apply like an ointment and say a few words and everything. And like my brother was fine. He was totally fine after. But things like that stuck with me of this, they didn't call a doctor.
Yeah.
Which in retrospect, I think if I was one and my kid was swimming in a river and got sick, I would immediately rush to the hospital. They called like the local healer, and, he was able to, make my brother feel better, essentially. So little things like that kind of stuck with me over the years. So when I was writing this, it would be, I figured it would be a cool thing to kind of dive into that part that I had kind of forgotten over the years of, like, it came back into my head of, oh, I remember they did that for my brother. I figured it would be fun to kind of learn more about it and explore it in kind of the middle grade space, something fun.
Oh, absolutely. And again, ages 8 and up, like I felt I learned a lot about just, the different things, because you could tell it had such a heavy influence, just on Mila. And so, I loved it. So anyway, let me talk about the first theme that I pull away from this book. And that is the theme tied into cultural appropriation. And so the restaurant opened by the Darlingtons, that's our celebrity couple. They seem to do this when they've decided to fuse Indian and Filipino flavors. And now the reasoning was that it just came to them. And of course, we're doing the air quotes. I know we're audio, but we're doing the air quotes here. So Mila is instantly ready to fight, but her dad says she can't go around accusing people of copying their recipes. And I love just the fire that she immediately had in that. But can you talk about the juxtaposition between Mila and her dad's point of view, and if you believe this aligns with different viewpoints of generations?
Like you said, Mila really was ready to fight. And I think that comes from the sense that, kids always call it like it is, for better or for worse.
Yes, they do.
They will tell you when they think something is bad or wrong. Whereas in the book, the dad is more cautious, kind of seeing how the world works and knows, even if something's a little bit unfair, it doesn't mean it's going to get corrected. But that's kind of the beauty of fiction, especially middle grade fiction, where there's going to be some sort of happy ending. We can always push the good guy ahead in stories like this. So I wanted to make sure that there was kind of some hope in there, but that Mila was going to be the driving factor in this. It wouldn't be any fun also if in like a kid's book, if Mila was like, this is terrible. And the dad was like, yeah, I'm going to go file a complaint. And then that was the end of the story.
I'm calling the Better Business Bureau. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So I wanted to make sure that Mila was front and center in the action. And so I went ahead and made her the heroine of this. And in general, I feel like that's kind of something that, younger generations seem to do. They seem to have the drive and the vision to do what, in fairness, we are all too tired and disillusioned to do. They're willing to be like, that is wrong. I'm going to speak up and try to fix this.
It's interesting. I mean, I pull several things out of what you just said. Number one, if I'm writing the book, it would have been over at like page 5, because I would have called the Better Business Bureau. I would have sent an angry tweet, and that would have been that. And end of story. But as you talk about that, I think that I think of my children, and I have an 11-year-old and a 16-year-old, and a lot of times, like, I'll say things that to me are common sense. They're, let's think things through, but they're just on the edge of, emotion. They're just going as it is. And I think that being that this is geared to young readers, that possibly it can allow them to see like why we have the different points of view and how we approach things differently. And, maybe you're hoping your readers get that too.
I mean, that's a good point of exploring why the dad doesn't immediately assume, like Mila does, that the recipes were taken. I think he's a lot more cautious in that this is his business. He knows if he goes around, just spouting out whatever without any proof, it's going to tank his reputation, tank his business and everything. So I explored in the book a little bit, but there's a lot more that the dad, you can tell that he's worried about,
yes,
rather than like, this is wrong, let me fix it. He's got a lot of other things he's got to balance.
Yes. And, where the book comes out tomorrow, so I'm not giving anything away, but the dad, after, the story goes on, I had one of the best lines, I think, of the book towards the end, laughed out loud, but I'm not going to say it because it gives the whole thing away. But just,
Oh no! See, now everyone's gonna have to buy the book and read it to know what
that's
exactly
absolutely that's what we're doing. You read it, and find out what that line is. So here's another theme that came out of my reading of the Takeout is the various relationships and dynamics of family. Being that family is kind of interwoven throughout, along with the continued reflection back into Mila's cultural heritage, what message do you hope readers take from this?
Yeah, with Mila's cultural heritage, this was something that, woven throughout the story. It's something that she struggles with because they have moved into this kind of super samey cookie cutter town where everyone likes the same bands and they kind of wear the same clothes and they all kind of like the same things. And she's different. She'd moved in from LA, which is like a whole other different ocean.
Yeah.
So when she goes in and tries to explore what it means to belong in this new town while still trying to figure out what it means to belong in her culture, it's a lot. It's really a lot that she has to kind of struggle through. So, for example, when it comes to her culture, her older sister is very in tune with their Filipino heritage. She's in a Filipino dance troupe. She does the folk magic. She's good at it. She's good at all of this stuff. And Mila is worried. She's like, I'm worried I'm not enough, in terms of like being Filipino enough, but also on the same side, she's like, I don't know if I'm Coral Beach is the name of the town. I don't know if I'm Coral Beach enough to be living here. There's so many parts of her that she doesn't think like match up to what she thinks she should be. And I think in general, one of the things that I wanted to kind of impart to readers is that it's okay to express or embrace your heritage differently. And it's fine. There's a lot of different ways to be, Filipino American, for example. I don't know if anyone has caught like my earlier book with Freddie versus the Family Curse, but he's got all sorts of other problems that Mila doesn't have. There's so many different ways to be Filipino American, to be American. And I actually stumbled upon a stat the other day from the Asian American Foundation. They did this study of, it's like social tracking of Asian Americans in the US, and they found something like 22% of Asians don't feel like they truly belong in society. Wow. And it's most pronounced among Asian American youth and Asian American women, which Mila, is an Asian American girl. And I think it was like a really sad statistic to know that there's going to be a bunch of, kind of young kids out there who feel like I was born and raised here and I don't feel like I'm 100% part of this society and people think of me differently. So hopefully they'll read this book and realize like, there's a lot of different ways to be who you are.
Absolutely. And I think that is something, when I put on my educator lens, that, as educators in, schools of, diversity and everything else, we have to be aware that, what fitting in means and how stressful I think that fitting in can be for students. And just that, just to remember that the students want to be able to be with their peers and like their peers, but at the same time not lose the cultural identity. And I think that in education, we've got to be very aware that we want to respect everybody's cultural identity. And I think that definitely comes out in your book.
Yeah.
So fitting in is a theme that we discussed last week, and this is not a personal statement, but it is also one that's prevalent in the Takeout as well, and that's there is nobility to standing up for what is right, but many times we see the internal struggle between doing what's right and doing what keeps us in the in crowd, so to speak. So what recommendations do you have for listeners on the topic of finding you in the place where you belong?
I have to say, I literally have no tips because I feel like this is something that we all struggle with, right? Like the search for where you belong can be lifelong. Like we're always moving, we're always growing. Even for me, when I moved from California to Washington, D.C. and then moved back to San Diego, that's like whole different like social networks and
Sure.
work networks and everything. You kind of have to start over. So I say all that to say, for readers or for anyone that you're not alone in the struggle of finding your place. There are, even if you did a quick online search for, there's like meetup groups and things where it's people just literally trying to find connection and, similar hobbies, and they're trying to find where they belong. It's just something that happens, I think,
Sure.
all the time for all of us. But especially like in Mila's case, and even in this is not a personal statement, I wanted to at least explore the fact that it takes time and work to get to the heart of who you are. It's not something that they came to overnight. Like Perla didn't automatically be like, you know what? I'm done with this stressful life. Like it took an entire book for her.
Right.
And there's a lot of outside pressure to be a certain way. So obviously with Perla, there was the stress to be like the perfect A+ student. And for Mila, it's like to fit into her new school and her new town, she has to be like super samey and like those same bands and love these celebrities who are possibly trying to tank her business, her family's business. And it's only through a lot of reflection do they even start to explore what it means to be authentically them. So no tips, got nothing. I'm also trying, but you are not alone.
All right. Well, hey, that right there makes a lot of us feel better. Before we go, Tracy, also coming out of this book are unlikely friendships. And so I want to be careful as to not give away key parts of the Takeout, but what lessons on friendships and partnerships did you try to embed into the Takeout?
Thank you for not trying to spoil some of the tips and tricks that I kind of pull out in the book.
I know.
But I think what was fun about this was making sure that I worked in that allies can come from unexpected places. So, these kind of friends may be more open to helping you than you think. Their help might come in a way that you're maybe not expecting, or, it's just like comes in different forms. And, one example that I will give, it's hopefully not a spoiler, but there's a news reporter that obviously Mila tries to turn to be like, hey, these celebrities stole our recipes and did all this. And the news reporter is, they want to help, but it's one of those things where like, just like Mila's dad, like, I don't know if I want to shake the boat.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to, like, you may have some, like a legitimate complaint, but without some proof, like I've got so much writing on my career that I can't help you in the way that you want right now. So, allies in unexpected places. And another thing I think is just the age old, that we tell kids, if they don't like you, they're not your friend kind of thing. That Mila obviously goes through, where she worries her friends aren't going to like this folk magic-y part of her. And this is, of course, a struggle that a lot of folks go through, because when you're in school, you're in such a small pool.
Yeah.
That you don't realize that the whole wide world is there for, with all sorts of different hobbies and everything. Like, just because no one in your school likes, I don't know, crocheting stuffed animals doesn't mean that isn't somebody out there that loves doing that.
Sure.
And we really see Mila just kind of doubt herself and hide who she is. But I'm hoping readers, look at that and wonder like, hey, I wonder if that's really worth it.
Absolutely. And readers will be able to pick up their copy tomorrow, because the Takeout's coming out ages 8 and up. For educators, it's for parents, it's for students. I mean, it's all around a great book. We're going to put a link on today's episode page. Tracy, thank you so much for coming back this week to talk to us more on Anchored in Education.
Thank you again for having me. Always a pleasure.
Now, you can read more about Tracy on today's episode page. Simply head over to my website, escottengland.com, and click on the podcast tab at top. You will also find all of Tracy's social media links, as well as a link to get your copy of The Takeout. And don't forget, if you haven't, subscribe to Anchored in Education, give it 5 stars, and hey, comment on it and tell us how much you love it on whatever platform you get your podcasts. If you are an educator or a parent, or anyone who works with or around kids, you know how much we learn from them. This is exactly why I could have authors like Tracy on every week. While Tracy is a working professional, her ability to tap into the psyche of children to deliver such impactful stories and lessons is beyond amazing. One thing that hit home with me about the Takeout is how often we appropriate ideas, themes, and cultures from others. I think this often happens because it is trendy, or we see someone else who is successful and we want that success. The problem is that credit or recognition is not often given. We have seen this a lot on popular apps such as TikTok. People with large followings post themselves doing a trendy dance or using a popular sound without giving credit to the original creator. When it blows up, the secondary poster gets all the credit. With the way social media has evolved, coupled with the advances in AI, we really have to do our due diligence in making sure that we are promoting those of original ideas and content. And if we borrow an idea, something that is a frequent practice in education, let's just remember to give credit where credit is due. I won't even make you cite it in APA 7th edition. And remember, at the end of the day, we are all anchored in education.